Just let me know when you'd like to begin.
All right, let's go, Kelly. Hello, and welcome to today's meeting of the Regional Housing Council. I'm Carolyn Cox, City of Lacey's representative to the council, and I'd like to go around and do quick jurisdictional introductions. I have Rick Walk, our Director of Community and Economic Development, with me here today. And let's go to Olympia.
Hi there, this is Jim Cooper from the Olympia City Council. With us, we have Rich Hoy, our interim assistant city manager, Darian Lightfoot, our housing director, and I believe Councilmember Madrone will be joining us as well, Danny Madrone. So good to see everyone.
Thanks, Jim. How about Thurston County next?
Good afternoon, Commissioner Mejia will be joining us here shortly. And we have Ramiro Chavez, County Manager, Tom Webster, and Keeley Murno so far. Thank you.
All right.
And Jacinda Stolches too.
Sorry, I skipped a window. Welcome, Jacinda.
Lacey Mayor Andy Ryder has joined us as well. And did we
So
get
is Councilmember Madrone too now.
Okay, let's welcome Danny Madrone. And let's move on to Tumwater then.
Hi, Michael Towser, Tumwater City Council. I am joined by Brad Medrud from our planning department, and I believe Councilmember Joan Cathy will also be joining, but I don't see her here quite yet.
Alrighty. Do we have anybody here from Yelm? I don't see him, but alrighty. Hopefully Brian can catch up with us later. Has everybody had a chance to look at the agenda? If so, could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved by Michael, seconded by Jim. All in favor of approval, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on. Approval of our September 28th meeting minutes. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Jim, seconded by Michael. Any comments on the minutes? Hearing none. All in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, got approval. Zip through that. Thank you. All righty. Next up, we have an update on the camp sweep proposals from Keeley. Keeley, are you ready?
She just texted me that she's having internet trouble, so might be just a minute.
Okay. All right.
Oh, looks like she's connected now.
Yeah, my internet keeps going out like every 2 or 3 minutes. So I'm on my phone, so I apologize. Recording. And I'm going to remain on my phone for the time being because my internet is just unpredictable. So I apologize.
That's okay.
Great. So I assume it's my agenda item since I was
Yeah, the camp
okay,
sweep
great.
proposal.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. All right. So this initiative actually was instigated by our public health officer and our interim public health director. So Dr. Damiana Abdamalik and Kurt Harden approached our office to discuss best practices with regards to sweeping or removing of homeless encampments. I think this was motivated by debriefing some of what happened during the Deschutes encampment. Dr. Abdumalik was actually quite involved, as was Interim Director Kurt Hardin, in some particularly difficult cases of individuals needing to be having a mental health and physical health crises and not being able to meet their needs, as well as a number of deaths that occurred in the hotels due to overdose. And so due to those public health concerns and those two individuals being pulled into several meetings, as we all were during that period of time, this conversation was born. And so the public health officer and public health director asked our office to put together a framework that would, in its essence, create a task force, if you will, from a public health perspective. So looking at it from that very specific perspective, and when we're addressing unsheltered individuals living outside, and how can we be more coordinated? How can we reduce harm, reduce deaths, unnecessary deaths, et cetera, unnecessary or preventable strains on our emergency responders, reduce political frustrations and interjurisdictional frustrations as well when giant sweet camps are swept, et cetera. So Jessica Olson was very new to our department and actually put this together. This proposal is based largely on the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. So this is backed by their recommendations on camp sweeps. And she put together a lovely acronym. I'm a huge fan of acronyms that spell words and aren't just just letters strung together. So Jessica had suggested the title of Harm and Emergency Abatement Response Team, or the HART. I apologize, I'm not able to share my screen because I am on my phone. I know that this is in your agenda packet. So, the stated in the document is the vision is to provide leadership and the facilitation of cross-departmental community-wide collaboration with the goal of ensuring the needs of the encampment residents, the neighborhood, and the greater community are accounted for. The structure honestly would follow the structure of the Hazardous Weather Task Force, which is a very effective task force and has been since its inception in 2017. So the idea would be, initially there'd be ground, just building that team and encouraging outreach to stakeholders to be engaged in those conversations, and then operationalizing it very much like a hazardous weather event. So if there's a camp that's growing and we understand that we're getting wind that it's going to be removed, this team would get together and pull together this action team, or the HART team, to go through and looking at every possible way to reduce harm, to try to get folks into housing rather than just scattered throughout the community, et cetera. And that would be kind of the functionality and the purpose that it would serve. So in the key objectives, and I'm sorry, I have to move my phone. The idea is like we get consistent stakeholder participation and feedback, supporting timelines that allow for consideration for all of those harm reduction strategies, looking at best practice, drawing down from federal sources as well as statewide resources with regards to best practice, engaging the camp residents in the process of moving, comprehensive coordinated outreach, addressing basic needs like wound care and keeping people alive with survival gear while those solutions are being considered, identifying resources that may be available for support, getting them enrolled, getting them connected with foundational community supports case managers to get them into housing units, et cetera, which is related to developing pathways to permanent housing and creating a plan for what's going to happen to that camp in the future after its closure. A lot of this is happening at the state level because of the right-of-way. This initiative and this conversation happened prior to the right-of-way coming into being. However, that's very specific and very focused on just the right-of-way, the state's right-of-way. So this would be an initiative that would be for our community ongoing, because we don't have enough housing right now to clearly, or sheltering to get people inside. So the probability of there being continued sweeps or removals from encampments throughout the counties is kind of a given. So the expected benefits is reduction in unnecessary deaths and unnecessary community trauma, including neighbors, schools, emergency responders, jurisdictional staff, as well as unhoused individuals. Better referrals, centering, this is best practice, each individual's choice in like how, getting them engaged in that process to find themselves a solution that's going to work better and be safer for them. Decreased duplication of efforts, which is really going to be important when we are faced with some 2163 document recording fees revenue being lower than the last couple of years has been awarded out. And then just making decisions as a community, as getting all the jurisdictions at the table. So at the end of the document, it just kind of runs down the Deschutes Parkway. It's just a case study of that particular effort. And that's what I have for you in terms of presentation, but I'm really glad to take any questions.
Does anyone have questions for Keeley? I guess my question would be next steps.
That is a good question. This was our next step. So I think that part of the next step would be if there's jurisdictional or buy-in from the Regional Housing Council as a body to consider this as a useful operation or a useful initiative, then we would continue the conversations internally with public health to decide, what does it look like to launch this or move forward. I would assume, but I look to Tom and to Ramiro.
Yeah, thanks, Keeley. I would add, I think we're looking for the RHC because for this to work, it really requires jurisdictional buy-in. And so that's what we really are looking for, and whether that's appropriate at the RHC level, whether we can get that at the RHC level, or is this something that needs to go back to jurisdictions to kind of provide input on and decide, there's not necessarily there's not a financial commitment. There's no financial commitment from the county on this, but it's a commitment of time and staff and really just a coordination. So I think some of what we're looking for is wanting to make sure we're all on the same page of taking this forward and what are those next steps. And I look to Ramiro to kind of how we want to make sure we get that jurisdictions bought into this process, because it's going to take jurisdiction support to make it effective.
Good afternoon. Maybe I would like to take the whole group back maybe 2-3 years when we had the initial discussions as to how this group can be formed. Because at that time, it was pretty evident the managing homelessness is not by jurisdictional boundaries. This is a regional issue. Affordable housing also is a regional issue. And I believe that was the premise in which this group was formed. And is the energy behind as to why we're here today. In this particular proposal, I believe it has to be a regional component, because we cannot go by jurisdiction that have a buy-in on a program on an issue that has regional elements. All of us need to be part of that solution. So as part of the next steps, I will ask really the Regional Housing Council conceptually if this is something that resonates to you. If it resonates to you, then the next steps will be for the staff to bring a little more tangible elements to this proposal for you to weigh in. When I heard this proposal, I totally in agreement. My concern was there is going to be only the county under the premise of public health that may be going through this process. There is a lot of public health elements and components on this proposal. They ought to be regional. And I think all of you represented each jurisdiction in the region. If this is a viable proposal, I would like to hear from you conceptually, if this is something you can gravitate towards.
Okay. Anyone want to make a comment? Okay. Well,
Uh,
go ahead, Michael.
I think this makes sense to me conceptually. I think why I sort of paused is I feel like I haven't had a lot of time to sort of digest how this would work with our city operations. And I think like what I would want to do is to take some time to circle back with John and our mayor to sort of discuss these things, especially because the implications of committing staff to it are something that I feel a little ill-equipped to just say like 100% we're in when I haven't had those discussions with the executive, right? Like I feel like I just have more due diligence to do before I can have a more thoroughly formed opinion about the specifics. But conceptually, it makes sense to me. I just feel like I have due diligence to do on my part before I, put all the chips in the basket, so to speak.
Thanks, Michael. Well, I feel very similarly. I think I'd like to have a little bit more time to digest this and talk it over with staff and council before I'd be ready to vote on approving it. Jim, do you have any thoughts? Oh,
Yeah, I'm in the same place, like technically, but I agree with Romero. This is the kind of thing that we came together for. In fact, this is the kind of thing I would expect the Board of Health or the health officer to mandate. Like it's a public health crisis anytime anyone gets moved from where they are, and in that way, there should be some power that forces us all to cooperate within reason, right? Realize, to Michael's point, you don't know how it's going to impact operations. There may be times where legally we need to move faster than we could really fully coordinate, even though I don't think there's ever a time when we couldn't give people a nod, even in that situation. So I think this is awesome, and I think that we need to move towards something like this. But we need to go back and shop it around and figure out where the boundaries need to be for our jurisdictions. And then lastly, I could see something like a charter that we sign on to that says within reason we'll come here first for these conversations, because they need to be coordinated and none of us can do it alone. So I really appreciate it, and thank you, Keeley and the team, for bringing this to us.
Carolina, do you have any feedback? Okay. And I see Brian Hess just joined us.
I need some time to read over it and think more about it. As I say, and as some others have been saying, we need, also talk with my fellow council members and find out where we stand on it and what we can provide and what we can't provide before I can really put a vote to that.
All righty. Would our next meeting be enough time to get back to your councils and staff and come back ready to make a decision? Our next meeting is October 26th. Seeing a nod from Michael, kind of a
Yeah, we have a meeting, I think on the 25th, to talk about a few things. So we would have a little bit of, if we needed to go run any, I think that would be enough time on our end.
Okay.
I can try to see if I can get it onto the agenda for our next meeting on the 25th. It's just we're also, that's when the budget's being proposed for the city. So it may be very difficult for me to have that discussion, because I'm not sure how long that meeting might be with the budget.
Understood. Well, perhaps you could have a conversation with your mayor and city manager or other staff member, at least get a sense of things.
I will see if I can't get with them and at least talk with my city, the city administrator.
Okay. That sounds good.
Carolyn,
Yeah.
I could expect that there could be more questions than decision-making readiness in 2 weeks. And
Yeah.
so I just wonder if there, maybe there's a way we could, who and by when send questions to, so that if we do have it on the agenda in 2 weeks, we're ready to answer questions versus not. That's my only concern with that timeline, other than we only have, well, we do have 2 meetings, but it might be a little challenging depending on how full they are. So.
Right. I think that's a really good suggestion. Who would like to be the keeper of the questions?
County staff, Tom or Keeley.
All right.
Yeah, I was going to volunteer Keeley, but yeah. We'll,
Yeah, that's
Tom
fine.
and Keeley
Yeah.
will, we can handle those.
Okay. So if you do have questions, please get them to Keeley. At least 4 or 5 days before the meeting. How much time do you need, Keeley?
That's fine. Yeah, that'll give us some time to talk in our office.
Okay, so maybe the Friday
And get
before
them answered.
our meeting. Does that work?
Friday the 21st.
Yeah. Okay. Questions to Keeley by then. All righty. Well, and I mean, I don't want everybody to feel like they absolutely have to have to vote on this at our next meeting. I'm just trying to keep things moving and we'll go from there. Keeley, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
No, thank you. I'm gonna take this opportunity to leave the phone meeting and come back on my computer. So, but thank you for the time. I'm glad to present it.
All righty. Well, let's move on to the right-of-way update. Tom, maybe you can launch since Keeley's trying to get back.
Sure, I'll start and also ask Darian and others to weigh in since we've got a lot of pieces. No big updates for right of way. We continue to move forward, having twice a week conversations with Commerce and the State Patrol and jurisdictions. Right now, our focus is around city center area, and so there's outreach been going on at city center. Unity Commons has been closed for the last little bit because of a COVID outbreak, so we're just waiting for that to reopen. And we have some folks that were looking to move into Unity Commons, so that process is starting around city center. So kind of continuing those discussions and problem solving. So that is moving forward. We are negotiating a MOU with the City of Lacey and Department of Commerce around the acquisition of the hotel. So we're continuing. I think we're getting pretty close with Commerce on language around that MOU. Still fine tuning that a little bit. So those conversations continue to move forward. I know there's hope for a possible November closing date on the hotel. I don't think a final date. I don't know if Rick or Jacinda, you have any insight on a final date. Some of that's going to depend on when Commerce is able to finalize a contract with Lehigh for that. So, but that continues to move forward. Mm-hmm. And then I'd ask Darian to provide an update on kind of Franz Anderson, Tiny Home Village.
Rick, did you have something to add before I move on?
No, I just that we don't have any updates on the closing date. It's still the same as it has been. Hasn't been moved up.
Yeah, Franz Anderson's still moving along. The structures that were there prior have been demoed and clearing and brush removal has begun. And so still working towards the right-of-way improvements and stormwater creation, studying the utilities, and laying out the 50 unit tiny homes. So we are getting under contract with a consultant right now to do design and layout. And so we are, excuse me, moving full steam ahead. I also see Unity Commons Phase 2 as part of the right-of-way initiative due to the $2 million included in their package. So they are set to close on funding for Phase 2 in January. So that's moving along, close on the project and start construction shortly after. So those are the two pieces I have to update on.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. And I'm going to piggyback on that to let folks know that along with Unity Commons Phase 2, we are going to be going to our Board of County Commissioners. You may remember, was it a year ago or so, you committed 1406 funds to support the Unity Commons. And so we've been working with staff and councils have approved the use of those 1406 funds, excuse me. So we're going to be moving forward with a request to officially kind of commit those 1406 funds to the county commissioners here in a couple of weeks. So just wanted to kind of update on that project as well, because that's tied into Unity Commons. So those 1406 funds will be going to the county commissioners. So, but any questions on the right-of-way initiative?
Anyone? Scan for raised hands here. Not seeing any. Okay. I am seeing some faces who have joined us. We've got Lacey City Manager Scott Spence has joined us since the conversation began. And want to welcome Joan Cathy from Tumwater. Anybody else joined late that hasn't been welcomed? Okay. All righty. Well, thank you for that. And let's move on to the very meaty topic of governance of this Regional Housing Council. Tom, do you want to launch that? Or
yep, I will kick that off, but others from the tech team can jump in. So just wanted to talk, and I know we could spend probably 2 hours continuing to talk about RHC governance, but we'll try to do this in a reasonable amount of time. Really want to talk about next steps and where we're moving. So a couple next steps are, one is we have a draft charter for the advisory boards. And we shared this in a packet, a previous meeting, and wanted to spend a little time walking through it today, because I don't think we've spent a lot of time kind of talking through this charter. So the next step is we want to move forward with finalizing this charter. So our hope is maybe it's certainly not this meeting, probably not the next meeting, but maybe in November, want to be looking to be able to finalize this charter so that we can begin recruiting for advisory board members kind of over the winter, with a timeline of trying to get those established in early 2023. So the other update, and I'm gonna I'll see if anyone from Olympia or Ramiro has an update as well in terms of the ILA. I know the Olympia county ILA around the home fund has been working on that language. That has been tied up. My last conversation with Elizabeth Petridge is there's a real intersection between the Olympia, the home fund ILA between the county and Olympia, and the RHC ILA. They need to kind of talk to each other and reference back to each other. So the lawyers have been communicating on that. What is the language? What are the amendments that are needed to the RHC ILA to incorporate the advisory boards and incorporate the kind of the Olympia, the home fund ILA? So they're working. So in some ways, I know we were hoping that the home fund ILA would move forward first, but I think what the lawyers are seeing that those really need to work in tandem to move forward together, because they're going to reference each other and they're going to be dependent on each other. Ramiro, do you have any other kind of updates on that ILA discussion?
Yeah. Prior to this meeting, I had a good conversation with Jay Burney. And I think it was a little bit of understanding where each other has come from. And I think right now we're on the same page related to that particular piece of the language. I think it's paragraph 4. And as Tom stated, there is a lot of intersections with the ILA or the RHC The question is, how deep do we want to get into the interlocal agreement with Olympia related to the ILA with the RHC? That conversation internally is going to be with Elizabeth, Tom, and I hopefully this week. And my hope is that we'll send a final language to the City of Olympia so we can get through the approval process. But I believe a good conversation with Jay. Finally, I think we understood each other where we're coming from. And I think it's just a matter of crafting the right language as to how that ILA makes a reference to the ILA of the RHC.
All right, let me pause to see if there's any questions on that ILA discussion at this point.
Anybody?
I just want to make a point that, I'm glad that conversation was able to happen. We're pretty strongly feel like the county and the city ILA has to go forward before we can open up the RHC ILA. And then, related to that, I just want to say again that the RHC ILA allows for more funding sources. So even before it's amended, we can start doing this work if the county commissioners agree. Now, I know they have an ordinance that directs Romero to do something different, but I think it's really important that we continue to lift up that we wrote this ILA to be expandable and not have to be opened up all the time. I agree that it should be, but I don't agree that it's holding us back from doing the work. So thank you.
Okay, who else?
All right.
Anybody who's attending just by phone have a question? Because I can't see a hand raised. Okay, let's go, Tom.
All right, so I'll keep going. So, so the draft charter, we kind of lay out a broad purpose, and these are for the advisory boards. Is really to make recommendations to the RHC on priorities, funding, and policies related to the funds that the RHC oversees. And saying that the boards will consist of citizens, community partners. And then we kind of talked through some of the numbers. One of the things I did want to highlight that's highlighted there, and this was based, we used the Olympia Home Fund Charter as the basis. And so one of the questions I wanted to bring out that we wanted to raise was around the issue of compensation for board members. I know that's been talked about. My understanding is the Olympia Home Fund does not compensate board members. We've talked about compensating the lived experience steering committee members. So I don't know, maybe that's old information and maybe those members are now being compensated. Is that, sorry, Councilmember Cooper, can you correct me if I'm wrong on that?
All of our advisory committees in the City of Olympia have the option of receiving a stipend. Some do and some do not. And I don't think it's really appropriate to talk about who is and who isn't in a public meeting. Though I have the understanding that largely the members of a home fund are not choosing that. But we have a policy that they do, and I'd love to see other jurisdictions move in to that space. It's an equity thing for access and participation in government for us. So.
Yeah, and to be clear, each not the board as a whole, but each individual person gets to decide for themselves whether or not they receive a stipend for their participation, and they can also self-certify as low income. I think it's $25 per meeting, but if you self-certify as low income, then it's $50 per meeting. Or you can choose not to have it at all.
So I think that's kind of one of the questions we have for this board is, do these advisory boards operate completely independently? Are they considered under kind of the county rules for how the advisory boards operate? Are they under kind of City of Olympia? Are they completely independent? And what is appropriate kind of around some of these questions for how these advisory boards will operate? And compensation was one that we know will be asked. We kind of indicated each board would have a minimum of 8 voting members and a maximum of 14. We wanted to keep the number manageable. And then say that an individual can only sit on one RHC advisory board, but an organization may have representatives on more than one advisory board. And then saying that an individual that serves on an advisory board may not serve as a non-voting member to the RHC. So they couldn't be on an advisory board and be one of the non-voting members at the RHC. Just to share, so they weren't making a vote as an advisory board member and then kind of seeing that same issue as a non-voting member of RHC. Want to raise that, but open for discussion and looking for your feedback on those recommendations. Terms would be up to 3 years. Terms could be renewed once for a maximum of 6 years. And then we were looking at a way to stagger those initially, so not everyone would end their term at the same time. So we looked during the initial startup for some staggering. Yes, Commissioner Mejia.
Thank you. My question about the compensation is, which fund would it come from if we decide to go that route?
Yeah, and so that would need to be something, a set aside that the RHC would have to set aside funds, and we'd have to have that discussion of where those funds would come from.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of talk roles and responsibilities, which we outline in that governance structure around priority setting, funding allocations, and recommendations. Meetings would be subject to open public meetings.
Hey, Tom,
Yep.
Councilmember Cooper had a question.
Oh, sorry, yes.
No worries. I didn't want to interrupt you because you were moving on a stream of consciousness. I just want to go back to the representation. I actually really like the whole charter. The pay is a question for me that I think we should try to resolve. It's really small, de minimis, even from the home fund if that was the sole source. And then when I think about the hat representation at the RHC, to me the best benefit would be to have the 2 people sitting on the advisory committees be those representatives, because you have a clear path from the advisory committee to the RHC, and they're not voting. So I could totally write the justification for either side of that conversation.
Yeah.
My sense is we would operate a lot better if they were actually on the subcommittees.
Yeah, that's certainly, a good point. It makes some sense. And I think some of it is also what's kind of the expectations for these people, that's potentially a lot of responsibility on a couple individuals. So
that's a really good point. And Paul, and I also want to say, I think in this situation, it's a little different than the home fund advisory committee by itself. Is if we have people that are being paid professionally to sit as part of their job role, then they wouldn't be eligible for whatever stipend. I don't know if that's obvious, but to me, that is something that I felt like I should say out loud, that we would, have that be a condition of that stipend, that you're not being paid by anyone else to sit there.
Right. Yes.
Are we offering general feedback on this section right here at this time? The advisory boards in general?
Happy to do it however Chair Cox wants to handle. If you want to do questions as we go, or
well, I just
go ahead.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just noticed that this is a broad-based group of citizens, but further down it talks about buy-in for us organizations, including immigrants and refugees. So just a slight tweak of word to resident, community member, whatever, I think would be appropriate.
Yes, thank you for that comment. Yes, completely agree. So then we get into some specifics on each board. For the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, what we're recommending, and this is kind of in the draft language, is at least 1/3, but no more. And we've added no more than 1/2 of members of the Affordable Housing Board would be residents of Olympia, because that's in the 1/3 is in the ILA between the county and Olympia around their home fund, since their funds are in that bucket. And then at least one member should be a resident or represent an organization with a housing focus from the other jurisdictions of Lacey, Tumwater, Yelm, and unincorporated Thurston County. 2 members would be nominated and represent the Housing Action Team. And then 2 members would represent either lived experience steering committee, or be a current resident of subsidized housing units, or be eligible to participate in a housing voucher program. So obviously there can be overlap. Some of those could be an Olympia resident and a Housing Action Team member. But those were some of the ones that we thought were important to make sure that those groups were represented on these boards, and then broadly listed other categories, lenders, developers, housing providers that we would want to also make sure were incorporated and represented, but not having a specific kind of number, or we have to have one of each of these, but more kind of a general, we want a diverse mix of these types of individuals. For the Homeless Services Board, very similar, except not having the requirement that at least 1/3 of the members be Olympia. Since they're the home fund, the Olympia Home Fund is not part of the Homeless Services Advisory Board, that requirement wouldn't apply to the Homeless Services Board. But at least one member would be a representative of all the jurisdictions, 2 members from the hat, and then 2 members would either come from the Lived Experience Steering Committee or be someone who has experienced homelessness. So, and then again, a list of the types of categories that we'd be interested in. And then listing that kind of staff would lead these agencies. So happy to answer questions. So there are some real sticking point questions. Compensation is one of them, but there's others in terms of representation as well. So happy. So I think at this point, what we're looking for is questions, feedback, thoughts, recommendations, gaps that perhaps we didn't address that should be addressed in this charter. We tried not to make it a 20-page document that listed every kind of rule. We didn't want to kind of box ourselves in too much, but if there's something we missed, please let us know. So happy to take questions, discussion at this point, but I think what we're really looking for is kind of maybe in our next meeting have a little bit more feedback on discussion on some of these questions, with the hope of getting it finalized by hopefully November, but certainly no later than December, so we can move forward with recruitment of individuals to sit on these boards.
Okay, Michael?
Yeah, I guess as first gonna lend support for Jim's comment about allowing someone, if they were serving on an advisory board, to also be able to sit at the RHC level, because if they're non-voting, it's not like they get 2 bites at the apple. I think their presence would be more for an informational purpose. And I guess sort of on a related point, we had discussed when we were discussing whether to be voting or non-voting, to build in some sort of structural sideboard, so that if at the RHC level, we went in a different direction from a recommendation of an advisory board, that the advisory board would be able to get another bite before we forward that on to the county commission. So we can't just ignore the input from the advisory board. Is that something that would be featured in this charter, or is that more of an ILA thing because it kind of governs the behavior of the council itself rather than advisory committee?
That's a good question. I think we have put some of that in. We're at the early stages of looking at amendments to the ILA, and we've kind of starting to incorporate some of that. So I say my initial thoughts would be in the ILA. But certainly if folks would like to see it in this charter, that's easy to add. So I look to the will of the group. Happy to add that to this charter.
I think that is to me that seems like an important component of power sharing, and one of the things we did discuss. So to the extent that we can call it out to highlight the respect we have for that decision-making process, it seems like it falls into the category of can't hurt from my seat.
Yep. Great, happy to add that.
So,
Councilmember Cooper.
Yeah, just from the ILA standpoint, one of the things that in the CIP, just to take people back a little bit, that never happened in that interlocal was it was directed to write bylaws. And to me, I would want to have the RHC have a charge from its government, partners about the main organizational structure, but then be in control of its own advisory structure. And so for me, that would be in the bylaws, not in the interlocal agreement, that I hope that we would write, even for our interim ability to work together. Like there's a lot of stuff we're kind of working out the policy on as we go through the particularly the funding strategies. And so I would see that, and maybe not in the interim. I could be pushed back and forth a little bit on that, but long term, that's something that we would, I think, talk about in our bylaws and then in our operational procedures, not necessarily the ILA.
Any other questions? Okay. Tom, do you have anything that you want to add here?
No, I would say just in broad sense of timing, we are realistically with our RFPs coming up, probably going to be, as we kind of establish these, we have had one meeting with some members of the HAT to review this. We want to continue to engage and get their feedback on this as well. I think our hope would be to kind of start, recruitments kind of over the winter, and probably wouldn't be able to start kind of sitting these boards until, March-ish kind of time frame. And then it's going to take some time to not train, but kind of get people up to speed and kind of establish kind of how these boards will work. So there's going to be a little bit of this year's RFP process maybe a little tricky with these boards, and especially on the capital side. The thought was we'll do an RFP for some of the federal home dollars that we typically do, but the home fund, the combined home fund dollars, we might do an RFP later in the year around June, once this board is fully established and up and running, so that they can have full input on those home fund dollars. But I think that's still kind of being worked out. But we're seeing the timing of getting these boards we're a little bit behind in terms of having them fully up and running in time for our RFP process this year from the start. So anyone else from the tech team want to weigh in on anything I missed or have any other thoughts? This was definitely a group tech team document. This was all of us working together.
Tom, I guess one question I have, having served on the RFP committee for this group, is would it make sense to have the RFP committee kind of be the backup for this year if as seems to inevitably happen, things keep coming up and things get slowed down and we really can't get the advisory groups trained up enough to do the job this year?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Between the tech team and the funding work group that we previously had, we'll need to have some backup role or potential there. So I think that is going to be appropriate.
All right. Yep. So RFP committee members are not off the hook yet, apparently.
So I just want to make a quick comment, Carolyn, on the timing of that. It's important that we don't have a gap. So Darian might want to look at our terms, because if there's going to be a gap, we may need to reappoint someone short term, because there'll still be possibilities of responsibility based on current contracts under the Olympia Home Fund that we want to make sure we can meet the obligation to the voters and not have a gap in that advisory committee.
Good point. So Darian, will you keep that on track? Awesome. All right. Anything else that we need to talk about on governance? Excuse me, before we move on. All right. I apologize. The smoke has really been getting to me of late. Losing my voice. So at the executive team meeting earlier this week, we talked about having just a couple of minutes to do check-ins on ARPA to kind of see where each jurisdiction is with whether, well, some of us I know have spent down some money and some have not. So kind of, if we could just kind of each go around and say what the status is of your ARPA funds, like we have some committed to this and this much remaining, we haven't committed or whatever, but just really quick. And I can start with Lacey. We have, I think our allocation was $6.8 million. Lacey took an early position that we hoped that ARPA money from each of our jurisdictions could be used for permanent supportive housing. That's something we've been working toward. Once the right-of-way funds became available and it became clear that that money would pay for the motel that Lacey and the county have been working to try to purchase, then our staffs, well, our city started looking at, okay, how are we going to commit these funds? And a proposal was brought forward. There are no decisions on it yet, and that is going to be part of the budget process. So things are in flux in Lacey. I can only speak for myself as a council member. I'm hoping that at least part of our ARPA funds can be committed to permanent supportive housing, but I am one vote. And so let's move on. Who wants to go next?
Can the county go next? Ramiro has to leave. So I just want to be respectful of that. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Ramiro.
Thank you. The county has participated with the city of Olympia using ARPA funds to purchase and help on the development of Franz Road. That has been an allocation of 1.7 million. And as the conversation has progressed, I will continue to advocate for the Board of County Commissioners to set aside an additional 3.5 million for affordable housing on the ARPA funds the county has received. Obviously, that requires a board's approval, but I'm committed to continue to suggest strongly to the Board of County Commissioners to set aside an additional 3.5. Aside from the commitment for the Franz Anderson road. Thank you.
Thanks, Ramiro. And if you have to scoot, thank you for being here.
Commissioner Mejia would like to add anything else to that, but sorry, I have to leave.
No, not for right now. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any.
All righty. We move on then to Tumwater.
Yeah, but I might have to lean on you, Brad, if you have some numbers in front of you. If I recall, we still have a bucket of $400,000 or $500,000 in it. But Brad, if you have any other details to offer, that would be great.
I had talked with John Doan about this earlier this week. So we have about $550,000 available for a regional housing project. We have not discussed with the council what that could be. So that is available, but we would like to make sure that we have the details of what, where, and how much to make sure that they're committed to that.
Thanks, Brad. Michael, anything to add to that? No. Okay. Olympia?
Yeah, so nothing has changed, and I've just been texting with Darren, so she might tell me the amount. But I know we have a placeholder still for Franz Anderson. I believe that's been a commitment of all 4 members of the RHC, and everyone has said it publicly in this meeting again and again and again. And so if there's a I even believe we have an MOU to develop that property. And so if there's a consideration for change, it'd sure be nice if it had come to the RHC before it went to a public meeting. $2 million is the dollar figure that we have set aside for Franz Anderson and are still holding that, and have spent upwards of $5 million of our 9 on housing.
Thanks. Yilm? Brian?
In reference to ARPA funds for Yelm, I'll be honest, I haven't heard anything about it. I'll have to reach out to our finance director to find out that information at this time.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we only have like 5 minutes left before the meeting closes. So I think we
Carolyn,
could, yes,
would it be helpful if your council received a letter from the RHC penned by the co-chair or by the vice chair?
I don't think so.
Okay. I want to do what's helpful. I almost came to your council meeting last week.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left, and we can either use this for a little bit more conversation on ARPA questions, or we can just move on to good of the order. So up to the body. Maybe we should give staff a chance to see if they have any comments they'd like to add.
Yes, I would love, I have a question.
Okay.
I consider, excuse me, myself and Jacinda the lead on the Franz Anderson project, trying to work for that to become permanent supportive housing. And in order for it to remain in the pipeline for the home fund and to remain in the pipeline for housing trust fund, and to hopefully have some of the ARPA dollars regionally connected to the project, we need to keep that moving. And so I would love some direction from the body on how we feel that could play out. If there's a chance that some of the county dollars, or as you said, Carolyn, maybe you said a portion could go to this regional project, we would love some clear direction on what that could look like. If we should continue developing a proposal, if we could have some of your time to talk about our proposal and what a funding structure could look like, we would really appreciate your time to talk about what we would envision in the timeline that would look like. So
Thank you. Scott.
So maybe it'd be helpful for Lacey to maybe have a better understanding, and this doesn't have to happen here, but the project that we're discussing related to the MOU. Because from what I understand, this seems to be a new project separate from another phase of the Franz Anderson project. So maybe the tech team get together, provide some clarity, because again, this is the last conversation in detail I had with Romero was talking about hotel acquisition. That's what we were trying to put the money towards. So this is, in my perspective, a new development. So it'd be helpful to have that conversation and clarify positions, if you will.
Okay. Jacinda and then Danny.
Yeah. Any electeds or any staff that I'll just first say, if anyone wants to reach out to Darian and I, we can further brief you on the Franz Anderson permanent supportive housing project that we are proposing. We were prepared to kind of bring that initially tonight to just kind of to brief everyone and to initially get buy-in. But I know it's a fluid conversation about ARPA. So I will just kind of remind everyone, or kind of, I guess, respond to Scott in terms of we applied for right-of-way for a hotel, and the state did provide some funding. They fully funded that, thankfully. We had proposed 2 hotels. They funded 1, and then tech team had distributed some an email and kind of information to all of this body, I believe, to let everyone know that tech team would be moving forward with looking at how we could use ARPA, pooled ARPA funding, as well as an application into the state for regional capital housing acquisition. So potentially 2 projects, housing projects that we would bring back or be working on and bring back in October. So that is what staff tech team has been doing. There is a proposal for how those funding streams, ARPA, could be used, applied to Franz Anderson. And as Darian mentioned, it's always great to leverage local funding, and in this case needed to leverage local funding with state funding, specifically Housing Trust Fund, as well as low-income housing tax credits. And so those budget conversations that are occurring, December final decisions make it very, very tight for staff to turn around an RFP or turn around something, a product that could attract those state leveraged funds in this next year. So the sooner that those decisions are made about ARPA, the better if there is regional interest in Franz Anderson or a project in general that would be leveraging state funds in this upcoming 2023 year. But please feel free to reach out to Darian or I if you want to have a more robust conversation or to see the proposal.
Okay. Before I call on Danny and Keeley, it is 5 o'clock. Do you all mind sticking around for 5 minutes so that we can wrap things up? Okay, so please, Danny and Keeley, keep it quick because we're going to need a minute or so to figure out where we go next.
Sure, yeah. I was just gonna say that when ARPA funds were coming in, we all talked about doing something really big to put a dent into the homelessness crisis, like to really get people into housing, reduce the visibility of homelessness, all of that for the community. We talked about 300 units of permanent supportive housing, and we're not there yet. So I just wanted to bring forward that conversation that we had many months ago, and just if that goal has changed, then that's a conversation that this group should have. But I think it's still a really great goal that we should be reaching for.
Thanks, Danny. Keeley?
Yeah, thank you. We had a tech team meeting prior to this meeting, and a lot of discussions have been happening in this last week around directions that the tech team was directly given to create the permanent supportive housing framework in direct response and request from the city of Lacey to fall in line with throwing down our ARPA funds towards permanent housing projects. And then that framework was voted on and approved by the Regional Housing Council. So in that way, I don't think this is a new project nor a new idea. And so from staff's perspective, one question that came up is if we have a something such as the permanent supportive housing framework, which the tech team is asked to provide, it is provided and then it is approved by the Regional Housing Council, but it doesn't hold, then in the future, we are looking for direction as staff as to what kinds of efforts are we being asked to put forward, and then what kind of sticking, like will that stay put? Did all that work for the permanent supportive housing framework that was approved by the RHC no longer matter? So staff are really looking forward to having that conversation and getting some clear direction on moving forward when new projects and requests are being made.
Thank you, Keeley. Jim?
Yeah, just in the vein of next steps, I'd like to kind of lift up Scott's suggestion that the tech team, regroup a little bit and make sure everybody understands what we've been reminded of and what the technicalities of that are. And then I would like to see the presentation at our next meeting. I don't think that we would want to wait until we knew that we had all of the funding in line. So seeing it with a little bit of uncertainty is good, and that can help us build the right project together, regardless of how we all end up deciding to spend our money based on the needs in our city, which sometimes can change. And I want to acknowledge that out loud, that priorities do change and they shift, and that happens. It's just hard to take when it's unexpected.
Thanks, Jim. And I agree about the tech team. Carolina, and then Scott.
I just was going to say that I agree with Jim's suggestion. I think we have to keep in mind that there's a deadline for these funds. They're not going to last forever. And like for the county, we have a strict deadline on when projects are supposed to be in, because if we don't have this, if we don't spend this money, we're going to lose it. And so the faster we move, the better, because I don't want to lose this money, and I don't want the board to be in a position where they have to readjust the funding because we don't think we're going to be able to spend it fast enough on projects when the need is obviously there. And so I agree with Jim's recommendation to have this proposal presented at the next RHC meeting.
Thanks, Carolina. Scott?
I guess I just want to, again, obviously, maybe there's a miscommunication on our part, but it does seem we're in an odd position where Lacey is the only jurisdiction that has ARPA funding remaining, its total amount, and everyone else has drawn it down. And so now we're looked upon as somehow we're critical to pushing this project over the finish line. So at some point we got to figure out, and we've had issues in the past, we got to figure out a better way to coordinate and make sure we're at the table so we're not having misunderstandings.
Well, we are here at closing time, so I guess I'll get the last word here. And that is, this is, to me, this is a classic example of how communication can go astray and misunderstandings can happen. And so I think we really need to double down on our efforts to make sure that we're communicating well with each other and that we don't have surprises in future. So if everybody can give a quick thumbs up that we have at least a discussion on our next RHC agenda about this, and that in the meantime, between meetings, the tech team will take this up, and I think they'll signal so that the exec committee knows how to frame it for our next meeting. So can I have a thumbs up? I'd like to hear from tech team if whether that feels doable or not, but okay. I'm seeing at least one thumb up, so from Rick. Alrighty. Well, thank you, everybody. A lot of ground covered today, and appreciate your forbearance and civility today. So if I don't hear any objections, I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody.